The gunshot that rang through the church hadn't killed anyone, but it might as well have killed Josephine Miller's heart as she stood at the altar in her best Sunday dress, watching Preacher Williams lower his pistol toward the floor after firing it into the ceiling to get everyone's attention. It was June 1878 in El Paso, Texas, and the small wooden church was packed with townspeople who had gathered for what they thought would be a wedding ceremony. Josephine's hands trembled as she clutched the small bouquet of desert wildflowers her younger sister had picked that morning. The preacher's face was red with what looked like a mixture of embarrassment and righteous indignation as he stared at her, his mouth set in a hard line. "I cannot in good conscience perform this ceremony," Preacher Williams announced, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent church. "This woman has deceived a good man, presenting herself as something she is not. I will not be party to such deception." Josephine felt the blood drain from her face. Behind her, she heard Thomas Crawford, her intended groom, shift uncomfortably. They had been courting for 3 months, ever since he had arrived in El Paso to work at the new bank. Thomas had seemed kind enough, if a bit reserved, and when he had proposed 2 weeks ago, Josephine had accepted gratefully. At 23 years old, she had nearly given up hope of finding a husband. She was a large woman, soft and round in a time when delicate frames were prized, and she had endured years of cruel comments and pitying looks from the townspeople. "What are you saying?" Josephine managed to whisper, though her voice carried in the shocked silence. "Mr. Crawford has informed me that you led him to believe you were of a more suitable size for a wife," the preacher said, his words like hammer blows. "That you wore deceiving garments to appear smaller than you are. He says he cannot enter into marriage under false pretenses." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Josephine wanted to sink through the floorboards. It was true that she had worn her best dresses when courting Thomas, garments with structured bodices that gave her a more defined shape, but she had never claimed to be anything other than what she was. Thomas had seen her plenty of times in regular clothing. If he had expected her to somehow transform into a willowy creature, that was his own foolish fantasy. "I never deceived anyone," Josephine said, her voice stronger now despite the tears that threatened to spill. "I have been nothing but honest." "The answer is no," Preacher Williams said firmly. "I will not perform this ceremony. Mr. Crawford, you are free to leave with my blessing." Thomas didn't even have the decency to speak to her. Josephine heard his footsteps retreat quickly down the aisle, and the church door slammed behind him with a finality that echoed through her chest. She stood frozen at the altar, humiliation washing over her in waves. Around her, she could hear the whispers starting, the gossip that would follow her for months, maybe years. "That is enough of this spectacle," Preacher Williams said. "Everyone should go home. There will be no wedding today." Josephine's vision blurred with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break down completely. She turned to face the congregation, preparing to walk the longest walk of her life down that aisle and out of the church. That was when he stood up. Henry Northwood had been sitting in the back pew, having wandered into town that morning after 3 weeks on the trail driving cattle from San Angelo to El Paso. He was dusty, tired, and had only stepped into the church because he had heard music and thought perhaps there might be some kind of social gathering afterward where he could get a decent meal. Instead, he had witnessed the cruelest public humiliation he had ever seen. Henry was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled at his collar. He had been working as a cowboy since he was 15, and he had seen plenty of ugly behavior in his time, but this turned his stomach. The woman at the altar had done nothing wrong, and she was being treated like a criminal. "Then I will marry her right here," Henry said loudly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Every head in the church turned to stare at him. Josephine's eyes, large and brown and wet with unshed tears, found his face. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. "What did you say?" Preacher Williams demanded. Henry stepped out from the pew and began walking down the aisle. His boots echoed on the wooden floor, and he kept his eyes fixed on Josephine's face. She looked terrified and confused, but also hopeful, and something about that expression made Henry's decision feel even more right. "I said I will marry her," Henry repeated, reaching the front of the church. "Right here, right now, if she will have me. You wanted to perform a wedding today, preacher, so perform one." Preacher Williams sputtered. "You do not even know this woman. This is ridiculous." "I know she showed up today ready to honor a commitment," Henry said evenly. "I know she has been publicly shamed for no good reason. I know she deserves better than what she has gotten in this church. That is enough for me." He turned to face Josephine fully. Up close, he could see that she was beautiful. Her face was round and soft, with high cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though it certainly was not smiling now. Her dark blonde hair was pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, and her dress was a pale blue that brought out the color of her eyes. "Miss, I do not know your name, but I am Henry Northwood," he said gently. "I am a cowboy, and I do not have much to offer except my word, which I keep, and my protection, which I give freely. If you are willing to take a chance on a stranger, I am willing to stand here and marry you right now, and I promise I will spend every day trying to be worthy of that trust." Josephine stared at him as if he had sprouted wings. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. "Why would you do this?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Henry said simply. "And because I have been alone for a long time and maybe we both could use someone in our corner." "You do not know me," Josephine whispered. "I could be terrible." "You could be," Henry agreed, and a small smile tugged at his mouth. "But I am willing to bet you are not. What do you say?" The church had erupted in chatter again, but Josephine barely heard it. She looked at this stranger, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to defend her honor, and she made a decision that was either very brave or very foolish. Perhaps it was both. "My name is Josephine Miller," she said, straightening her shoulders. "And yes, I will marry you, Henry Northwood." Preacher Williams looked like he had swallowed a lemon. "This is highly irregular. You two do not know each other. I cannot in good conscience." "You already showed everyone here how much your conscience is worth," Henry interrupted, his voice hard. "You will perform this ceremony, or I will make sure everyone in El Paso knows that the preacher who was willing to humiliate a woman in front of the whole town refused to marry her to a man who actually wanted her. How do you think that will sit with your congregation?" The threat was clear, and the preacher knew he was cornered. With a sour expression, he opened his Bible. "Very well, let us begin." The ceremony was awkward and rushed. Preacher Williams recited the words with obvious reluctance, and the congregation watched with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and in some cases, disapproval. But Josephine found herself focusing only on Henry's face. He was watching her with steady, calm eyes, and when it came time to say his vows, he spoke them clearly and firmly. "I, Henry Northwood, take you, Josephine Miller, to be my wife. I promise to honor you, protect you, and stand by you from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death parts us." Josephine's voice shook as she repeated the vows, but she made it through them. And then Preacher Williams was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Henry was looking at her with a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down to press a brief, chaste kiss to her lips. It was her first kiss, and it was over almost before it began, but Josephine felt it all the way to her toes. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Josephine saw a range of expressions. Her younger sister, Margaret, was crying happy tears in the third row. Some of the townspeople looked approving, others scandalized. Thomas Crawford was nowhere to be seen, having fled like the coward he was. Henry offered Josephine his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. Together, they walked down the aisle and out into the bright Texas sunshine. Once outside, away from the prying eyes, Josephine felt reality crash down on her. She had just married a complete stranger. She did not know where he lived, what his habits were, whether he had a temper or drank to excess, or any of 100 other things she should have known before binding her life to his. What had she been thinking? "Are you all right?" Henry asked quietly. Josephine realized she was gripping his arm very tightly. She loosened her hold and took a shaky breath. "I do not know. This is all very strange." "It is," Henry agreed. "Would you like to go somewhere and talk, actually talk, I mean, and figure out what happens next?" The practical question helped ground Josephine. She nodded. "Yes, that would be good." "Is there a restaurant or boarding house nearby where we could sit down?" "The boarding house where I have been staying is just down the street," Josephine said. "Mrs. Patterson, who runs it, makes good coffee." "Lead the way, then," Henry said. They walked through the streets of El Paso, an odd pair in their wedding clothes drawing stares from people they passed. Josephine kept her chin up, refusing to show any shame. She had nothing to be ashamed of. The shame belonged to Thomas Crawford and Preacher Williams, not to her. The boarding house was a 2-story adobe building with a shaded porch. Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 50s, was sitting on that porch doing needlework when they arrived. She looked up with curious eyes. "Josephine, I thought you were getting married at the church today." "I did," Josephine said. "Mrs. Patterson, this is my husband, Henry Northwood. Henry, this is Mrs. Patterson, who runs the boarding house." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. "Well, congratulations to you both. Would you like some coffee? You both look like you could use some." "That would be very kind, thank you," Henry said. They settled at a small table in the boarding house's dining room, and Mrs. Patterson brought them coffee and some sweet bread she had baked that morning before tactfully leaving them alone. Josephine wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold on to. "All right," Henry said, taking a sip of his coffee. "We should probably start by getting to know each other a bit. I will go first. I am 26 years old, originally from Missouri. I have been working as a cowboy for about 11 years now, ever since my parents died of cholera. I do not have any siblings. I do not drink much. I do not gamble more than the occasional card game, and I have been told I snore, but not too badly. Your turn." Despite everything, Josephine felt a smile tug at her lips. There was something disarming about his straightforward manner. "I am 23 years old, born and raised in El Paso. My father died when I was 18, a mining accident. My mother remarried and moved to California with her new husband last year. I have one younger sister, Margaret, who you saw in the church. She is 20 and lives with her husband on a small ranch outside of town. I have been working as a seamstress and living in this boarding house. I do not drink at all, I do not gamble, and I have been told I talk in my sleep sometimes." Henry smiled. "Snoring and sleep-talking. We will be quite a pair, Henry," Josephine said, her smile fading. "Why did you really do this? You could have just walked away, you did not have to get involved." Henry was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I have spent a lot of time alone," he said finally. "Moving from ranch to ranch, town to town, following the work. It is a hard life and a lonely one. I have been thinking lately that it might be time to settle down, find something more permanent. And then I walked into that church and saw what was happening to you, and I got angry. I got angry at that preacher, and at that coward who left you standing there, and at everyone who was just sitting there letting it happen. I thought, if I were a better man, I would do something. And then I realized I could do something. So I did. That is not much of a foundation for a marriage, Josephine said quietly. No, it is not, Henry agreed. But it is a start. Look, I will be honest with you, Josephine. I did not stand up there expecting to fall in love at first sight or any of that nonsense. But I looked at you, and I thought you seemed like a good person who had been dealt a bad hand. And I thought maybe we could make something decent out of this situation, maybe even something good. And if we cannot, Josephine asked, what then? Then we figure that out when we come to it, Henry said. But I meant those vows I took. I am not going to walk away from you the way that other fellow did. I am not built that way. Josephine searched his face, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives. All she saw was honesty and a quiet determination. It was more than Thomas had ever given her. I do not have much money, she said. I have some savings from my seamstress work, but not a lot. I have some saved up too, Henry said. Not a fortune, but enough to get started. I was actually planning to look for work here in El Paso. The town is growing, and I heard there are some ranches in the area that need good hands. I am tired of drifting. I want to put down roots somewhere. You would stay in El Paso? Josephine asked, surprised. Unless you want to go somewhere else, Henry said. This is your home. I do not want to take you away from it unless you want to go. The consideration in his voice made Josephine's throat tight. Thomas had talked about taking her to Dallas, away from everything and everyone she knew, without ever asking if that was what she wanted. Henry, a man she had known for less than an hour, was already thinking about what she might need. I would like to stay, Josephine said. My sister is here and some friends. It would be hard to leave. Then we will stay, Henry said simply. We will need to find a place to live. I have been staying at a camp outside of town with some other cowboys, but that is not suitable for a married couple. There is a small house for rent on the edge of town, Josephine said slowly. I looked at it a few months ago before Thomas proposed. It is not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it has a good stove and the roof does not leak. The owner wants $15 a month. That seems reasonable, Henry said. We could go look at it tomorrow if you like. Tomorrow, Josephine repeated. The word felt strange in her mouth. Tomorrow she would wake up as a married woman. Tonight she would share a bed with a stranger who was now her husband. The thought made her face heat. Henry seemed to read her thoughts. Josephine, he said gently, I know this is all happening very fast. I do not expect anything from you tonight or any night until you are ready. We can take this as slow as you need. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were not from humiliation. Thank you, she whispered. You are being very kind. I am being decent, Henry corrected. That is not the same as kind. It is just what any man with honor should do. They finished their coffee and Mrs. Patterson came back to ask if they would like anything else. When Josephine explained the situation, that they had just gotten married and needed a room for the night, Mrs. Patterson was more than happy to accommodate them. She had a larger room on the 2nd floor with a double bed, and she moved Josephine's few belongings into it while Henry went to fetch his things from the camp. By the time Henry returned, it was late afternoon. Josephine had changed out of her wedding dress and into a simple, everyday dress, and she had tidied the room nervously about 15 times. When she heard his footsteps on the stairs, her heart began to pound. Henry knocked softly before entering, which she appreciated. He had cleaned up a bit, washing the trail dust from his face and hands, and he carried a worn leather bag that presumably held all his worldly possessions. Looking at him in the doorway, Josephine was struck again by how tall he was and how broad his shoulders were. He was a good-looking man, she realized, with strong features and eyes that were a warm brown. "Is this all right?" Henry asked, gesturing to the room. "Yes," Josephine said. "It is fine." An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Henry set his bag down and turned to face her fully. "Josephine, I know this is strange for both of us," he said, "but we are married now, and we are going to be living together, so I think we should try to be comfortable with each other. Can we try that?" "I do not know how," Josephine admitted. "I have never been married before. I do not know what I am supposed to do." "Neither have I," Henry said with a slight smile. "So I guess we will figure it out together. How about we start by having dinner? Mrs. Patterson mentioned she is cooking a roast tonight." Dinner was less awkward than Josephine had feared. Mrs. Patterson had set a nice table for them, and she served the meal with a motherly warmth that helped ease the tension. Henry talked about some of his experiences on the trail, telling stories that were funny and sometimes harrowing. Josephine found herself laughing at his description of a particularly stubborn longhorn that had led the entire herd on a detour through a creek. "We must have spent 3 hours getting them all back together," Henry said, shaking his head at the memory. "And that ornery beast just stood there watching us like he was proud of himself." "Did you have to rope him?" Josephine asked. "Eventually," Henry said, "but not before he got his revenge by stepping on my foot. I limped for a week." Josephine winced in sympathy. "That sounds painful." "It was," Henry agreed, "but it taught me to be more careful around livestock with an attitude." After dinner, they returned to their room. The sun was setting, casting golden light through the window. Josephine felt her anxiety returning as she realized bedtime was approaching. Henry seemed to sense her nervousness. "I can sleep on the floor," he offered. "I have a bedroll in my bag." "The floor is hard," Josephine said. "And you paid for the room. It would not be right." "I do not mind," Henry said. "Your comfort is more important." "Henry," Josephine said, making a decision, "we are married. We should share the bed. I trust that you will be a gentleman." "I will," Henry promised. "You have my word." They prepared for bed awkwardly, taking turns changing in the privacy of the small washroom. Josephine put on her nightgown, a modest white cotton garment that covered her from neck to ankles, and braided her hair for sleeping. When she emerged, Henry was already in bed, lying on the far edge and facing the wall to give her privacy. Josephine climbed into bed on her side, leaving a careful space between them. She blew out the lamp and darkness filled the room. She could hear Henry's breathing, steady and even, and the small sounds of the house settling for the night. "Good night, Josephine," Henry said quietly. "Good night, Henry," she replied. Despite her anxiety, Josephine found herself drifting off to sleep more easily than she had expected. Perhaps it was the emotional exhaustion of the day, or perhaps it was the strange comfort of not being alone. Either way, she slept deeply and dreamlessly. The next morning, Josephine woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented, and then she remembered everything. She was married to Henry. She turned her head and saw that he was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed and pulling on his boots. "Good morning," Henry said, noticing she was awake. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," Josephine said, surprised that it was true. "Did you?" "Very well," Henry said. "Though I think you were right about the sleep talking. You said something about chickens at one point." Josephine felt her face heat. "Oh no, what did I say?" "Just something about counting them," Henry said with a smile. "Nothing embarrassing, I promise." They had breakfast with Mrs. Patterson and the 2 other boarders, an elderly man and a young woman who worked as a schoolteacher. Both of them stared at Henry with obvious curiosity, but they were polite enough not to ask too many questions. After breakfast, Henry and Josephine walked to look at the house for rent. It was on the outskirts of town, a small adobe structure with a wooden door and 2 windows with shutters. Inside, there was a main room with a fireplace, a smaller bedroom, and a kitchen area with a cast iron stove. It was simple but clean, and Josephine could already imagine making it into a home. "What do you think?" she asked Henry. "I think it is perfect," Henry said. "Small enough to keep warm in winter, and those windows will catch the breeze in summer. The stove looks solid, and there is space out back for a garden if you wanted one." "I have always wanted a garden," Josephine admitted. "Then you should have one," Henry said. "Let us go talk to the owner." The owner, Mr. Garcia, was an older Mexican man who lived in a larger house nearby. He was happy to rent to them, especially when Henry paid the first month's rent in advance. They arranged to move in the next day, which gave Josephine time to pack her few belongings, and Henry time to purchase some basic furniture and supplies they would need. Over the next few days, they settled into their new home. Henry bought a bed frame, a table, 2 chairs, and a trunk for storing clothes. Josephine used her savings to purchase dishes, pots, pans, and linens. They worked together to make the small house comfortable, and Josephine found herself enjoying the process of building something with Henry. He was easy to work with, she discovered. He listened to her opinions and never dismissed her ideas. When she suggested painting the walls a soft yellow to brighten the main room, he agreed immediately and helped her do it. When he proposed building a chicken coop in the backyard so they could have fresh eggs, she thought it was a wonderful idea and helped him construct it. They fell into a routine. Henry found work at a ranch about 5 miles outside of town, riding out before dawn and returning at sunset. Josephine continued her seamstress work, taking in mending and making dresses for the women of El Paso. In the evenings, they would have dinner together and talk about their days. Slowly, cautiously, they were building a friendship. 2 weeks after their wedding, Josephine's sister Margaret came to visit. She arrived with her husband, Robert, and a basket of preserves as a housewarming gift. Margaret hugged Josephine tightly as soon as she stepped through the door. "I am so sorry I have not come sooner," Margaret said. "Robert and I were dealing with a sick calf and we could not leave the ranch, but I have been thinking about you constantly. Are you all right? Is he treating you well?" "I am fine," Josephine assured her, "and yes, he is treating me very well." Margaret pulled back to study Josephine's face. "Really, truly, truly," Josephine said. "Come in and meet him properly." Henry had been outside tending to the chickens when Margaret and Robert arrived. He came in now, wiping his hands on a cloth, and greeted them warmly. Josephine watched as her sister assessed Henry, seeing the protective way Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly as she shook his hand. "You are the man who married my sister," Margaret said. It was not quite an accusation, but close. "I am," Henry said calmly, "and you are her sister who cares about her. I am glad Josephine has someone looking out for her." "Someone needs to," Margaret said, "given what happened at that church." "I agree," Henry said, "which is why I am trying very hard to be a good husband to her. I know I am a stranger to you and you have no reason to trust me yet, but I hope in time I can earn that trust." Margaret seemed taken aback by his directness, but Josephine saw her expression soften slightly. "Well," she said, "we shall see." They sat down to coffee and the sweet bread Josephine had made that morning. Robert, a quiet man with a kind face, asked Henry about his work at the ranch, and the 2 men fell into an easy conversation about cattle and horses. Margaret pulled Josephine aside into the kitchen. "Tell me the truth," Margaret said in a low voice. "Are you really all right? This all happened so fast. If you are unhappy or if he is cruel to you, you can come stay with Robert and me." "I know," Josephine said, touched by her sister's concern. "But truly, Margaret, I am fine. Better than fine, actually. Henry is a good man. He is kind and respectful, and he does not treat me like I am a burden or an embarrassment." "But do you love him?" Margaret asked. Josephine paused, considering the question. "I do not know yet," she admitted, "but I think I could. I like him, and I respect him, and I feel safe with him. That is more than I ever felt with Thomas." Margaret sighed. "Thomas was a fool and a coward. You deserve so much better." "Maybe I found better," Josephine said quietly. When Margaret and Robert left an hour later, Margaret hugged Josephine again, whispering in her ear, "He seems good. I am glad." That night, as Josephine and Henry cleaned up after dinner, she found herself thinking about Margaret's question. Did she love Henry? She did not think so, not yet. But there was something growing between them, a warmth and affection that felt promising. She was no longer afraid when he entered a room. Instead, she found herself looking forward to seeing him, to hearing about his day, to the small moments of connection they shared. A month after their wedding, something shifted between them. It was a hot August evening, and Henry had come home exhausted from a long day of work. Josephine had made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, and they ate mostly in silence. After dinner, Henry went to sit on the small porch they had in front of the house, and Josephine followed him with 2 glasses of cool water. "Thank you," Henry said, accepting the water gratefully. "It was a scorcher today." "You look tired," Josephine observed, sitting down beside him on the bench he had built. "I am," Henry admitted. "But it is good work. Mr. Henderson, who owns the ranch, said he is pleased with me. He is talking about making me a permanent hand instead of just a day worker. It would mean more money and more stability." "That is wonderful," Josephine said. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Then Henry spoke again, his voice quieter. "Josephine, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I know this is not the marriage you expected to have. I know I am not the husband you chose. But are you at least content?" Josephine turned to look at him. His face was serious, and there was vulnerability in his eyes that she had not seen before. She realized that this question mattered to him, that her answer would matter. "I am more than content," she said honestly. "Henry, when I was standing at that altar and Preacher Williams rejected me, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never have a husband or a home or any of the things I wanted. And then you stood up and you gave me all of that. You gave me a chance. So yes, I am happy." "Are you?" Henry was quiet for a moment, and then he reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond the casual, practical touches of daily life, and Josephine felt a jolt of warmth at the contact. "I am," he said. "I did not expect to be. I thought this would be a marriage of convenience, something practical and nothing more. But you have made this house a home, Josephine. You have made me look forward to coming back at the end of the day. I find myself thinking about you when I am working, wondering what you are doing, if you are well. I think we have something good here, something worth keeping." "I think so too," Josephine said softly. They sat there holding hands as the sun set completely and the stars began to emerge. Something had changed between them in that conversation, an acknowledgement that their marriage was becoming real, that their feelings were deepening beyond mere friendship or convenience. That night when they went to bed, Henry pulled Josephine close for the first time, and she went willingly, resting her head on his chest and feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. It felt right, being in his arms. It felt like coming home. The next few months passed in a blur of work and domesticity. Henry became a permanent hand at the Henderson ranch, which meant a steady income and better hours. Josephine's seamstress business grew as word spread about her skill with a needle. They saved money carefully, talking about their future and what they wanted to build together. In October, Henry surprised Josephine by bringing home lumber and announcing he was going to add a room onto the house. "Why?" Josephine asked, bewildered. "Because we might need it someday," Henry said, and there was a warmth in his eyes that made Josephine's heart skip. "And because I want you to have space for a proper sewing room. You do such beautiful work, and you deserve a place to do it right." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. "You are too good to me." "I am exactly as good as you deserve," Henry said, kissing her forehead, "which is very good indeed." The addition took several weeks to complete, with Henry working on it in his spare time and Robert coming over on weekends to help. When it was finished, Josephine had a lovely bright room with a large table for cutting fabric and shelves for storing her supplies. She was so overcome with gratitude that she threw her arms around Henry and kissed him properly for the first time since their wedding. The kiss surprised both of them with its intensity. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, and Henry's eyes were dark with something that made Josephine's pulse race. "Josephine," he said, his voice rough, "I need to know. Are you ready for this marriage to be a real one in every way? Because I care about you too much to push you, but I would be lying if I said I did not want you." Josephine's heart was pounding, but she felt no fear, only anticipation. "I want that too," she said. "I want to be your wife in every sense of the word." That night, they became husband and wife in truth. Henry was gentle and patient, making sure Josephine felt safe and cared for. And when it was over, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Josephine realized with a start that she loved him. Somewhere along the way, without her even noticing exactly when it happened, she had fallen completely in love with her husband. "Henry," she whispered, "I love you." She felt him tense in surprise, and then he pulled her even closer. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I have loved you for weeks, but I was afraid to say it. I was afraid you would think I was just saying it because we are married." "I would never think that," Josephine said. "You have shown me with your actions how you feel. The words are just confirmation." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and when Josephine woke the next morning, she felt like a different person. She felt cherished and loved and whole in a way she had never experienced before. The holidays that year were the happiest Josephine could remember. She and Henry hosted Thanksgiving dinner for Margaret and Robert, and they laughed and ate until they were stuffed. Christmas was a quiet affair, just the two of them, but Henry gave Josephine a beautiful silver thimble for her sewing work, and she gave him a new hat she had saved up to buy. They were simple gifts, but they were given with love, and that made them priceless. In January of 1879, Josephine realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She told Henry one evening after dinner, watching his face anxiously for his reaction. For a moment, Henry just stared at her. Then a huge smile broke across his face, and he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Josephine, we are going to have a family. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see that he was. "I am the happiest man in Texas," Henry said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Josephine suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Henry would hold her hair back and bring her cool cloths with a patience that made her love him even more. As she grew bigger, she worried that Henry would find her less attractive, but he only seemed to find her more beautiful. "You are growing our child," he would say when she voiced her insecurities. "How could you be anything but beautiful?" The baby was born in September of 1879, after a long and difficult labor. Josephine was attended by the town midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered half the babies in El Paso. Henry paced outside the bedroom for hours, and when he finally heard the baby's cry, he nearly broke down the door getting inside. "You have a son," Mrs. Chen announced with a smile. "A healthy boy." Henry looked at Josephine, who was exhausted but glowing, holding their baby in her arms. The baby was red-faced and squalling, but to them he was perfect. "What should we name him?" Josephine asked. They had discussed names before, but now that the baby was actually here, they needed to decide. Henry looked at his son for a long moment. "How about James?" he suggested. "After my father. James Northwood," Josephine said, testing the name. "I like it. James it is." James proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who rarely slept and had powerful lungs. Those first few months were exhausting, with Josephine up multiple times a night to feed him, and Henry helping however he could when he was not working. But they were also joyful, watching their son grow and change every day. By the time James was 6 months old, he was a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everything and everyone. Margaret and Robert were frequent visitors, and Margaret would often hold James for hours, cooing over him and declaring him the most handsome baby in Texas. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier than before but full of love and laughter. Henry continued to work at the Henderson Ranch and had been promoted to foreman, which came with a significant raise in pay. Josephine had to slow down her seamstress work while caring for James, but she still took on special projects when time allowed. When James was a year old, Josephine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Lucy, was born in the summer of 1881. She was a quieter baby than James had been, with her mother's brown eyes and her father's dark hair. Henry was absolutely smitten with his daughter. Josephine would often find him just staring at Lucy as she slept, a look of complete adoration on his face. "I never knew I could love someone this much," he told Josephine one night. "Between you and James and now Lucy, my heart feels like it might burst." "Mine too," Josephine said, leaning against him as they watched their children sleep. James was in a small bed in the corner of the room, and Lucy was in the cradle Henry had built. "We are very lucky." "We are," Henry agreed, "though I do not think luck had much to do with it. I think we built this, together." As the years passed, their family continued to grow and thrive. In 1883, they had another son whom they named Michael. By then, they had saved enough money to buy the house they had been renting, and Henry had added another room to accommodate their growing family. James grew into a lively, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere and dreamed of being a cowboy just like him. Lucy was quieter and more thoughtful, often helping her mother with the sewing and asking endless questions about everything. Michael was still a toddler, but he was already showing signs of having his father's stubbornness and his mother's kind heart. Josephine sometimes thought back to that awful day in the church, to the humiliation and heartbreak she had felt. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to someone else. That day had been the worst of her life, but it had also led to the best thing in her life, her marriage to Henry. She never saw Thomas Crawford again. She heard through town gossip that he had left El Paso not long after their failed wedding and had moved to Dallas. She hoped he had found what he was looking for, but she could not bring herself to care very much. He had been a coward, and she had been lucky to escape marrying him. Preacher William still presided over the church in El Paso, but Josephine and Henry had stopped attending services there. Instead, they went to a small Catholic church on the other side of town, where the priest was kind and accepting, and never made anyone feel less than. Josephine liked the services there, liked the ritual and the sense of community. In 1885, when James was 6 and starting school, Josephine and Henry celebrated their 7th wedding anniversary. It fell on a Sunday, and they decided to have a picnic with the children out by the Rio Grande. It was a beautiful day, warm but not too hot, with a breeze that kept the worst of the heat at bay. The children played in the shallow water while Henry and Josephine sat on a blanket, watching them and eating the fried chicken and biscuits Josephine had packed. 7 years, Josephine said wonderingly. It does not seem possible that it has been so long. Best 7 years of my life, Henry said, taking her hand. Mine too, Josephine said. Henry, do you remember what you said to me that first day at the boarding house? You said maybe we could make something decent out of our situation, maybe even something good. I remember, Henry said. I think we made something better than good, Josephine said. I think we made something wonderful. Henry squeezed her hand. I think you are right. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching James splash Lucy while Michael tried to catch minnows in his chubby hands. Then Henry spoke again. Josephine, I need to tell you something. Something in his tone made Josephine turn to look at him. What is it? Mr. Henderson is retiring, Henry said. He wants to sell the ranch, and he offered to sell it to me first, before he puts it on the market. Says I have been the best foreman he has ever had, and he wants to see the ranch go to someone who will take care of it. Josephine's eyes widened. Henry, that is wonderful. But can we afford it? Not all of it, Henry admitted. The ranch is big, over 500 acres with a decent house and good grazing land, but Mr. Henderson is willing to work with me on the price. He said I could pay him over time, and he is giving me a very fair deal. If we use our savings as a down payment and I take out a small loan from the bank, we can do it. A ranch, Josephine said, the idea taking root in her mind. Our own ranch. It would be hard work, Henry warned. Harder than what we are doing now, and it would be risky. But it would be ours, Josephine. We would be building something for our children, a legacy to leave them. Josephine thought about it for only a moment before making her decision. Let us do it, she said. Let us take the risk. Henry's face broke into a huge smile. Really? You are sure? I am sure, Josephine said. We have taken risks before, Henry. The biggest risk of all was when you stood up in that church and married a stranger, and look how well that turned out. Henry laughed and pulled her close, kissing her soundly. You are an extraordinary woman, Josephine Northwood. And you are an extraordinary man, Henry Northwood, Josephine replied. Now let us go tell our children that they are going to be ranch kids. The purchase of the ranch took several weeks to finalize, but by October of 1885, the Northwood family moved into their new home. The ranch house was larger than their house in town had been, with 4 bedrooms, a proper parlor, and a big kitchen with a wood-burning stove that made Josephine sigh with happiness. The land was beautiful, rolling hills covered with prairie grass and dotted with stands of mesquite and oak trees. There was a creek that ran through the property, providing water for the cattle and the house. Mr. Henderson left them a starter herd of about 50 head of cattle, along with a few horses and all the equipment they would need to get started. Those first months were a whirlwind of activity. Henry hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who lived in the bunkhouse and earned their keep working the cattle. Josephine planted a massive vegetable garden and started keeping chickens, ducks, and geese. She also set up her sewing room in one of the spare bedrooms and continued to take in work when time allowed. James loved ranch life. He was constantly following his father and the ranch hands around, learning to rope and ride and tend to the cattle. Lucy was more interested in the animals, especially the horses, and she spent hours in the barn grooming them and feeding them apples. Michael was still too young to help much, but he toddled around after everyone, getting into mischief and making them all laugh. In 1887, Josephine gave birth to their fourth child, another daughter they named Rose. With 4 children and a ranch to run, life was busier than ever, but Josephine had never been happier. She had a husband who loved her, children who filled her days with joy, and a home that was truly theirs. The ranch prospered under Henry's management. He proved to have a good head for business, and he made smart decisions about breeding stock and when to sell. By 1890, they had paid off their loan and owned the ranch free and clear. They had also expanded the herd to over 200 head and had built a reputation for raising quality cattle. The children grew and thrived. James, at 11 years old, was already a skilled rider and roper, and he talked about nothing but ranching. Lucy, at 9, had discovered a talent for training horses and had already successfully gentled 3 of the ranch's horses. Michael, at 7, was showing an interest in the business side of ranching, always asking his father questions about prices and markets. And little Rose, at 3 years old, was a bundle of energy who wanted to do everything her older siblings did. Margaret and Robert were frequent visitors to the ranch, and their own family had grown to include 3 children of their own. The cousins loved playing together, and the 2 families would often have dinner together on Sundays after church. In 1892, Josephine's mother made a surprise visit from California. She had been away for so long that Josephine barely recognized her at first. Her mother had aged, her hair gone gray and her face lined, but her eyes were the same. The reunion was emotional. Josephine's mother wept when she saw her grandchildren and met Henry for the first time. Over dinner that night, she pulled Josephine aside. "I heard about what happened at your first wedding," her mother said quietly. "Margaret wrote to me about it. I am so sorry I was not there for you." "It is all right, Mama," Josephine said. "It worked out for the best." Her mother looked at Henry, who was entertaining the children with a story. "He is a good man." "The best," Josephine agreed. "I am very lucky." "Not lucky," her mother corrected gently. "Blessed. There is a difference." Josephine's mother stayed for 2 weeks before returning to California, but in that time she got to know Henry and the children. Before she left, she told Josephine that she was proud of her, proud of the life she had built and the woman she had become. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and hard work and love. The children grew up strong and capable, each of them contributing to the ranch in their own way. James took on more and more responsibility, learning everything he could from his father. Lucy started a small side business training horses for other ranchers in the area. Michael kept the books and handled the correspondence with buyers. And Rose, as she grew older, became her mother's right hand in running the household and managing the garden. In 1898, when Josephine was 43 years old and Henry was 46, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. By then, James was 19 and talking about getting his own place on the far side of the ranch. Lucy was 17 and being courted by a nice young man from a neighboring ranch. Michael was 15 and had his heart set on going to college to study business. And Rose was 11 and still full of mischief and energy. On their anniversary, Henry took Josephine out to a hill that overlooked the ranch. They sat on the grass, watching the sun set over their land, over the legacy they had built together. 20 years, Henry said. "I can hardly believe it." "Neither can I," Josephine said, leaning against him. "Do you remember what you said to me in that church, Henry? You said you would honor me, protect me, and stand by me. You have done all of that and so much more." "You made it easy," Henry said. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." Loving you has been my greatest joy, Josephine said. You saved me that day, Henry. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. We saved each other, Henry corrected gently. You gave me a reason to stop drifting. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. I was the one who was saved. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. Josephine thought about the girl she had been 20 years ago, standing at that altar, humiliated and heartbroken. She thought about how terrified she had been, how certain that her life was over. She had been so wrong. Her life had not ended that day. It had begun. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked. "About how grateful I am," Josephine said. "For you, for our children, for this life we have built. For that moment of courage when you stood up in that church." "Best decision I ever made," Henry said. "Best thing that ever happened to me," Josephine replied. They kissed as the last of the sunlight faded, two people who had started as strangers and become each other's everything. Below them, on the ranch they had built together, lights began to glow in the windows of the house where their children were. Their home, their legacy, their love story, written not in words but in the life they had created together. As the years rolled on, their children began to make their own ways in the world. James did indeed stake out a portion of the ranch and build his own house, bringing home a wife in 1900, a practical young woman named Sarah who fit right into the family. Lucy married her beau in 1901, and though she moved to his ranch, it was close enough that she could visit frequently. Michael went to college in Austin, but he came home every summer and promised that, when he finished his degree, he would return to help manage the ranch's business affairs. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman who inherited her mother's gentle spirit and her father's determination. She eventually married a doctor and moved to El Paso proper, but she remained close to her parents and visited often. By 1905, when Josephine was 50 and Henry was 53, they were grandparents to 6 grandchildren, with more on the way. James and Sarah had 3 children, Lucy and her husband had 2, and Rose had just had her first. The ranch house was often full of the sounds of children playing, and Josephine and Henry would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching their grandchildren run around, and marvel at how much their lives had changed. Henry's hair had gone gray, and he moved a bit slower than he used to, but he was still strong and capable. He had handed over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch to James, but he still rode out every morning to check on things. Josephine's hair had silver threads running through it now, and she had laugh lines around her eyes from years of smiling, but she was still the same woman Henry had married, just more so, more confident, more certain of her place in the world. One evening in the spring of 1906, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Henry reached over and took Josephine's hand, just as he had done thousands of times over the years. "Josephine," he said, "I want you to know something." "What is it?" she asked, squeezing his hand. "I want you to know that marrying you was the best thing I ever did," Henry said. "Not because of the ranch, or the children, or any of the other wonderful things that came from it, but because of you. Because you are the best person I have ever known, and I am grateful for every single day I have gotten to spend as your husband." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Henry still had the power to move her with his words. "Henry Northwood, I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I loved you quite a lot even then." "How much is quite a lot?" Henry asked with a smile. "Enough to take a chance on a stranger who stood up for me when no one else would," Josephine said. "Enough to build a life with you. Enough to last forever." They sat there holding hands as the sun dipped below the horizon, two people who had taken a chance on each other in a moment of crisis and turned it into a lifetime of love. Behind them, Through the open windows of the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing and their children talking. The sounds of family. The sounds of home. Henry had been right all those years ago when he stood up in that church. He and Josephine had made something decent out of a bad situation. They had made something good. But more than that, they had made something beautiful, something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone, in the children and grandchildren who carried their love forward into the future. As darkness fell and the stars came out, Josephine leaned her head on Henry's shoulder, feeling perfectly content. Her life had not turned out the way she had expected when she was a young woman dreaming of marriage and family. It had turned out better, so much better than she ever could have imagined. All because a cowboy had stood up in a church and said, "Then I will marry her right here." And he had kept that promise every single day for the rest of their lives together. Years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. In 1908, Michael returned from college with his degree and a new wife, a sharp-minded woman from Austin named Catherine, who took to ranch life with surprising enthusiasm. He set up an office in one of the ranch buildings and modernized their record-keeping, helping the ranch become even more profitable. Rose and her husband moved back from El Paso in 1910, when he took a position at the hospital in a nearby town. This meant Josephine got to see her youngest daughter and growing family of grandchildren much more often, which brought her immense joy. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined efforts of the Northwood family. James proved to be an excellent rancher, with an instinct for cattle that matched his father's. With Michael handling the business side and the support of the entire family, the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. But for Henry and Josephine, the greatest wealth was not measured in cattle or acres. It was measured in the Sunday dinners where 3 generations gathered around their table, in the sound of grandchildren playing in the yard where their own children had once played, in the quiet evenings sitting on the porch together watching the sunset. In the summer of 1912, the whole family gathered to celebrate Henry and Josephine's 34th wedding anniversary. It was a massive affair, with all 4 of their children, their spouses, and 10 grandchildren present. They roasted a pig, and there was enough food to feed a small army. Margaret and Robert came too, bringing their own grown children and grandchildren. As the party wound down and the younger grandchildren were put to bed, the adults sat around a bonfire, telling stories and laughing. James, now 33 and looking more like his father every year, stood up to make a toast. "I want to say something about my parents," James said, his voice carrying in the warm night air. "I have watched them my whole life, and I have learned what it means to truly love someone. Not just the easy love of courtship, but the hard love of building a life together, of weathering storms, of choosing each other every single day. Dad, you stood up for Mom when no one else would. And Mom, you took a chance on a stranger. And from that courage, this whole family was born. Every person here tonight exists because of a choice you two made 34 years ago. So thank you. Thank you for showing us what love really means." There was not a dry eye around the fire. Henry stood and embraced his son and then pulled Josephine close as well. "We did all right, didn't we?" He whispered in her ear. "We did better than all right," Josephine replied. "We did magnificent." As the celebration continued, Josephine found herself standing a little apart, watching her family. She saw Lucy teaching one of her daughters to braid another child's hair, just as Josephine had taught Lucy. She saw Michael and Catherine discussing something animatedly, their heads bent together in the way of couples who truly listen to each other. She saw Rose's husband gently carrying their sleeping youngest child toward the house. And she saw James and Sarah working together to bank the fire, moving in the synchronized way of partners who knew each other's thoughts. This was her legacy, she realized. Not just the ranch or the money or the things they had built, but this, the love they had taught their children, the example they had set. Their children had all found good partners, people they respected and loved and built lives with. That was the greatest gift she and Henry could have given them. Henry came to stand beside her, sliding his arm around her waist. After all these years, his touch still gave her comfort, still made her feel safe and loved. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how that terrible day in the church was actually the best day of my life," Josephine said. "If Thomas had not rejected me, if Preacher Williams had married us, I would have had a miserable life with a man who did not value me. Instead, I got you. I got this." "I think about that sometimes too," Henry admitted, "about how close we came to never meeting. If I had not walked into that church at that exact moment, if I had not had the courage to stand up, if you had not been brave enough to say yes to a stranger, so many things had to go exactly right for us to be here." "Or maybe it was always supposed to be this way," Josephine suggested. "Maybe we were always meant to find each other, and everything that happened was just the path that led us together." "I like that thought," Henry said, kissing the top of her head. "That you were always meant to be mine and I was always meant to be yours." They stood there for a long moment, watching their family before Henry spoke again. "Josephine, I am getting older. We both are. And I want to make sure you know that if anything happens to me, you will be taken care of. The ranch is in your name as much as mine. James knows to look after you. You will never be alone." "Henry, do not talk like that," Josephine protested, though she knew he was being practical. They were both in their 50s now, and while they were still healthy, they were not young anymore. "I am not being morbid," Henry assured her. "I fully intend to live to be 100 and bounce great-grandchildren on my knee. But I need you to know that you are provided for, that you are protected. It is my job to make sure of that." "You have been doing that job for 34 years, Josephine said. "You have never failed me once, Henry Northwood." "And I do not intend to start now," Henry said with a smile. Life on the ranch continued its steady pace through the next several years. Henry and Josephine settled more into the role of matriarch and patriarch, offering advice and wisdom but letting their children run things. They spent more time with their grandchildren, passing on stories and skills. Henry taught the grandsons to rope and ride, while Josephine taught the granddaughters to sew and cook, though both of them made sure to teach all the children that there was no shame in learning any skill, regardless of whether it was traditionally for boys or girls. In 1915, the family celebrated the birth of Josephine and Henry's first great-grandchild when James's oldest daughter had a baby boy. Holding her great-grandson for the first time, Josephine was overwhelmed with emotion. She had gone from being a woman who thought she would die alone and unloved to being the matriarch of this huge, thriving family. "For generations," Henry said, standing beside her and looking down at the baby. "We have lived to see 4 generations, Josephine. That is a blessing." "It truly is," Josephine agreed, tears streaming down her face as she gently rocked the infant. As they aged, Henry and Josephine's love for each other only deepened. They had been through so much together, built so much together, that they were woven into each other's very beings. They could communicate with just a look, could sense each other's moods and needs without words. They moved through their days in harmony, 2 people who had become one unit while still maintaining their individual selves. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch and reminisce, talking about the early days of their marriage, about the children when they were small, about the challenges they had overcome and the triumphs they had celebrated. Every story ended the same way, with them marveling at how lucky they had been, how blessed. In the spring of 1918, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The party was even bigger than the one for their 34th, with family coming from all over Texas to be there. There were over 40 people in attendance, all of them connected to Henry and Josephine through blood or marriage. During the celebration, Margaret, now 60 and still Josephine's closest confidant, pulled her sister aside. "Do you remember that day in the church?" Margaret asked. "I was so scared for you, I thought your heart would break." "It did break," Josephine admitted, "but then Henry put it back together and it has been whole ever since." "He is a remarkable man," Margaret said. "You were so lucky he was there that day." "We were both lucky," Josephine corrected. "He needed me as much as I needed him. That is what made it work, I think. We were not just looking for someone to complete us. We were complete on our own, but we chose to build something together." At the party, Henry gave a speech that had everyone in tears. 40 years ago, I walked into a church and saw an injustice being done," he said. "I stood up because it was the right thing to do. But what I did not know, what I could not have known, was that in standing up for Josephine, I was actually standing up for myself. I was claiming my own happiness, my own future. Marrying Josephine was not just an act of kindness or chivalry. It was the most selfish thing I have ever done, because I got to spend the last 40 years with the most amazing woman I have ever known. Josephine, you have made my life worth living. You have given me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. You have given me a home and a purpose and a reason to be a better man. I love you more today than I ever have, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you, the same promise I made 40 years ago, and I have kept it every single day since." Josephine was crying too hard to respond with words, so she simply stood and kissed him, to the applause and cheers of their family. As they entered their 60s, Henry and Josephine slowed down more, but they never stopped being active in ranch life. They attended church every Sunday at the little Catholic church they had been going to for decades. They hosted Sunday dinners for anyone in the family who could make it. They took walks around the ranch property in the mornings, hand in hand, greeting the day together as they had done for 4 decades. In 1922, on a warm September evening, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. Henry was 69 now, his hair white and his face deeply lined, but his eyes were still bright and alert. Josephine was 67, her hair also white, her body softer and rounder than ever, but she still moved with purpose and grace. "Josephine," Henry said suddenly, "do you have any regrets?" Josephine thought about it carefully. "None about us," she said finally. "None about the life we built or the choices we made together. Maybe small things, moments I wish I had handled better, words I wish I had said or not said, but the big things? No, no regrets." "Good," Henry said. "Neither do I. I just wanted to make sure you knew that you know how happy you have made me." "I know," Josephine said, squeezing his hand. "And you have made me just as happy. We did it, Henry. We took a terrible situation and made it beautiful." "We sure did," Henry agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch spread out before them, their legacy in every building and fence post, in the cattle grazing peacefully, in the house full of family memories. It was all theirs, built from nothing but determination and love. Years continued to pass gently. They celebrated their 45th anniversary in 1923, their 50th in 1928. By then, they were the oldest generation, their contemporaries mostly gone. But they remained active and engaged, still hosting family gatherings, still offering advice and support to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. On their 50th anniversary, James organized a huge celebration. Over 100 people attended, family and friends from all over Texas. There was music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Henry and Josephine sat in chairs of honor, watching the festivities, holding hands and marveling at everything they had created. 50 years, Josephine said wonderingly. Half a century. Best 50 years of my life, Henry said, as he always did. Mine too, Josephine replied, as she always did. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Henry and Josephine stood in their bedroom, the same room they had shared for decades. Henry helped Josephine with the buttons on her dress, as he had done countless times, and she helped him with his boots. As they lay in bed together, Henry pulled Josephine close. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Josephine asked. "For saying yes," Henry said. "For taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for loving me, for everything." "Thank you for asking," Josephine replied. "Thank you for standing up when no one else would. Thank you for seeing me when others looked away. Thank you for loving me exactly as I am." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for 50 years, two hearts beating as one. Henry and Josephine continued for several more peaceful years, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They saw great-great-grandchildren born. They celebrated more anniversaries, more birthdays, more milestones. And through it all, they remained devoted to each other, their love a constant in a changing world. When Henry passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1932 at the age of 79, Josephine was devastated but not broken. She mourned him deeply, missing his presence every single day. But she also carried forward, knowing that was what he would have wanted. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by family, still hosting Sunday dinners, still offering wisdom and love to all who needed it. She lived for another 8 years without him, and they were not easy years, but they were not empty either. She was surrounded by love, by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who adored her and took care of her. She told stories about Henry, making sure the younger generations understood what kind of man he had been, how his courage had saved her and created this entire family. On a quiet spring morning in 1940, Josephine passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85. She was laid to rest next to Henry in the family cemetery on the ranch, their graves side by side, together even in death as they had been in life. At her funeral, which was attended by over 200 people, James stood up to speak. He was 71 now, white-haired and dignified, but his voice was strong as he addressed the crowd. "My parents' story began with an act of courage," he said. "My father stood up when no one else would, and my mother was brave enough to accept his offer. From that one moment of bravery, all of this was born. Everyone here today, everyone whose life they touched, exists because of that choice. They taught us what love really means. Not the easy, romantic love of stories, but the hard, daily love of choosing someone, of building something together, of staying even when things are difficult. They loved each other for over 50 years, and that love created a legacy that will continue for generations. We are all here because a cowboy stood up in a church and said, 'Then I will marry her right here,' and because a woman was brave enough to say yes. We honor their memory by carrying forward the love they taught us, by being brave in our own lives, by standing up for what is right even when it is hard. That is their legacy. That is their gift to us." The ranch continued to prosper under James's stewardship and was eventually passed down to his children and then to their children. The Northwood name became synonymous in the region with integrity, hard work, and family values. Generations of children grew up hearing the story of their great-great-grandparents, of the cowboy who stood up in a church and the woman who was brave enough to take a chance. And always, at the heart of the story, was love. Not the kind of love that comes easily or without effort, but the kind that is built day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. The kind of love that transforms lives and creates legacies. The kind of love that lasts forever. In the years that followed, the story of Henry and Josephine became a legend in the family, passed down from generation to generation. Young brides would visit their graves before their weddings, asking for the same kind of love and courage that Henry and Josephine had shared. The ranch remained in the family, a testament to what two people could build together when they chose love over fear. And so the story that began with rejection and humiliation in a church in El Paso in 1878 became a love story for the ages, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that courage can change everything, and that love, true love, can overcome any obstacle and create something beautiful that lasts forever. Henry and Josephine's great-great-great-grandchildren still work the ranch to this day, carrying forward the legacy of love and courage that began when a cowboy stood up and said, "Then I will marry her right here," and changed two lives and countless others forever.